All right. Well, again, so thank you everyone for joining our first session of our 2021 webinar series. The series will focus on device management, but we're going to start off with our roundtable. And to give you an idea of what the rest of the series will look like, here is the schedule and all of these session titles. We are on this first one here, setting your sights on the future, but starting next month in February, we will dive into our series main topic, or our series title, which is saying goodbye to legacy and embracing modern endpoint management. So we'll start off with looking at desktop analytics, kind of getting an idea of what kind of details you can pull out of your own environment, some tools that can do that. Going all the way through just learning about your environment and your devices, all the way through managing, deploying configuration management to all of those devices, onboarding new devices, and then finally cleaning up retired devices. So we'll take you through the entire life cycle of what an endpoint should go through in your organization. So that's the schedule. I'll have this up again here in a little bit. But I do want to also introduce our panelists from Improving. We've got a good collection here of expertise across the Improving organizations, ranging from our devices, identity and infrastructure, also collaboration and SharePoint. Sorry, that's my dog. And then also kind of business operations and management. So today we do have Chris Ball and Rick Streckle. They will be kind of our experts on device management and endpoint management. We'll have a huge impact or involvement on our upcoming series in 2021. We also have Sean Mosier, who is going to speak for our collaboration team. So SharePoint, Teams, pretty much anything on the collaboration side. Sean's our guy. And then we also have Michael Batt and James Hopkins. Hopefully Jim has joined in, but if not, that will be Michael Batt to talk about identity, security, and infrastructure. And we also have Bill Curry, who can talk to just kind of business operations and management. So with that being said, if anybody wanted to give more of an introduction than that, feel free to do so. Otherwise, let me go ahead and jump in. So as I said, if you have any questions, feel free to use the raise your hand function in Teams. Feel free to come off mute and ask questions. This is really here for everyone to learn as much as that they can, and also to make sure that we talk about the topics they want to hear about. So, the first item I want to discuss among the group is really, where did we see, obviously 2020 was a big impact with the pandemic and everything, but I think it affected every company a little bit differently. And if we look at where companies were expecting to go in 2020, just from an operational perspective, what was and this is directed towards you, Bill, what would you say was one of the biggest challenges? What was one of the, if you looked at 2020 before the pandemic, April, March, maybe February, where were the trends in operations going from a business perspective?
Yeah, what we saw a lot of at that point was working to adopt different workloads, not a big impetus from the cloud perspective on the Microsoft side. So there was a desire, but there was an urgency behind it, when we started the year. So many of our customers, even within Improving, as we looked at where we were at and what we wanted to get to in the year, it was more of a midterm policy, midterm strive of these are the types of things we'd like to see occur this year, versus the reality of what happened in the year. So,
what about from the Microsoft side? What did I know this was a big change that every company went through, and we are here to talk about a lot of Microsoft technologies. But prior to the pandemic, what was the vision or the direction that Microsoft had led into 2020 with? What were they going to focus on originally? What were their intents?
Yeah, Teams was a big piece for Microsoft at the start of 2020. So I would say they got lucky a little bit with the remote work, what happened with remote workforce and what happened with Teams during the year. But then you also saw some of it aligned. Microsoft in many ways got lucky with from a Teams perspective, from a security perspective. They've been looking at how do they beef up, and many of our customers know this, beef up their security offering and have a better offering for our customers and their customers. Probably the other place that I think we probably saw a slowdown in is actually on the Power Platform side of things. Microsoft's big enough that I don't know that the pandemic necessarily impacted that too bad, but you saw a huge push at the end of 2020, or actually 2019, sorry, I get my years right. At the end of 2019, a big push on the evolution of the Power Platform. So you saw Power BI coming into existence. You saw the Power Apps coming in. You saw the switch from Flow to Power Automate. They had to get their marketing in, not Power Everything. But you saw that desire, and you saw there was a roadmap of some pretty good things that were going to be coming on that platform that you actually, I would say, as the year went on, I think they still got done, but I don't think it had the same drive that many of the other items that were in their focus at the beginning of the year.
Great. So, you mentioned that Microsoft had a big focus on Teams prior to the pandemic, and they kind of got lucky, but obviously that did become a big impact. I don't think that they expected to have nearly the adoption that they did in Teams going into 2020 that they ended up with at the end of the year. But, Sean, since, you focus a lot on the collaboration, Teams is a collaboration tool. What did you expect going into 2020 prior to the pandemic? I mean, did you see that same focus on Teams? Did you see what was Microsoft's really their initiative within Teams? Was it chat? Was it just web meetings, online meetings? What were you seeing? You're on mute.
Yes, and one of the new features of Teams is to tell you when you're on mute and you start talking. Spectacular, huh? So yeah, one of the big, I think that really for Microsoft, the drive for Teams is to create it as the nexus for all things cloud, Microsoft Cloud. So I mean, really, it's not just chat, and they brought all those products into it. They brought in the Skype for Business. They brought in SharePoint. They brought in OneDrive. They brought in all these pieces, parts. They made it very extensible. They made it very scalable. So now you can have large, beyond just the Brady Bunch grid, and then making it scale, making it secure. Obviously, they were on the right trajectory at the beginning of the pandemic, like Bill mentioned, because that was a focus area for them, and it became all the more so as everybody started diving into Zoom and other products that were similar but not exactly the same.
Sure. Okay. So, this kind of brings up an item that, Jim, you've mentioned to me before. Going into 2020, Microsoft's goal for Teams adoption was, I don't know how many million across their customer base, but then it ended up within March, they tripled that? Or can you give a little more details on what you saw?
Yeah, sure. So we met, I don't remember the exact time frame, but we met with our account representatives in probably January, February. And one of the Teams goals that all of the account managers for Microsoft had was they were supposed to get Teams to about 41 million users by the end of FY20, which is in June, July timeframe. In working with, so part of what I do for improving as well as I run and manage the Fast Track relationship. And our Fast Track manager told us that in late February, there were about 19 million active users of Teams worldwide. By the end of May, there were 71 million users of Teams in the US. So it went from, a pretty good sized usage to gigantic. So we saw some repercussions of that where Teams policies would take 24 to 48 hours to apply. New Teams accounts would take a little time to be created, but they sacrificed the creation to preserve performance. So yeah, the growth of Teams was just absolutely explosive. And it still does continue to be a focus for them to make sure people continue to use Teams.
Sure. Sure. So, when we start talking about using Teams more often, and there was a big learning curve, right, to all the customers and all the businesses out there that necessarily didn't have a good team strategy, so to speak, right? It was there. We kind of tinkered in it. We used it for some chat stuff, but they didn't have a really strong strategy around it. Bill or Sean, what did you kind of expect when the pandemic did hit? Despite rapid growth in Teams adoption rapidly there, but what did you kind of expect the direction for Teams to take as Microsoft was trying to pull in, or as Jim said, they were sacrificing onboarding to preserve performance. Were there other tools within Teams that they were looking at other than just web meetings? Were there, because I've heard there's a lot of like app development or plugins that you could do into Teams, but it kind of felt to me that kind of lost some traction when it all started shifting to everyone from work from home. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. The other thing I think you saw, and I think everybody on this call probably saw it as well, is I think there was a catch up that Microsoft had to do, quite honestly, at the start of the pandemic. So they had a plan and a roadmap, and they got beat by some other competitors with bringing capabilities to market faster. And so you saw some of that focus from the team's product development to catch up on those features and bring those features in a secure manner on the Microsoft platform. Where you do see it, it's still a push there, and Microsoft started to push more there, and we're starting to see quite a few customers look into it, which is what I would call it's within Teams having the applications that actually help the workers get their job done. So it's very much applets inside of Teams that many of them tie into bots and tie the bots together to make it easier for the what Microsoft calls the first line workers to get work done easier. And in the environment you mentioned it, Microsoft's trying to drive everybody that you're doing your work on a daily basis, large portions of your work inside of Teams. That's where you see this push on the applications is, hey, let's get some apps to actually help workers inside of Teams to answer some, make their life easier. So we've got it improving. I'll give an example where we're looking at this. We have a mindset around all of our employees are involved, and we actually have a program called the Employee Involvement Program. Actually, Mike Batt runs that for us. But in that program, one of the things you track is the meetings that you're involved in that are outside of work. So we have town halls and get regular gatherings that are occurring. We're actually looking at, okay, how do we make it easier for people to track EIP points by having in the meetings the ability to automatically say, hey, request or claim my EIP points in this meeting and tie it right into the Teams meeting that's already occurring. So we haven't figured out how we're going to do that yet, but that's an example of making it easier for our employees to do the things that we're expecting them to do on a daily basis and just simplifying and automating the process.
Sure. So, then we saw in 2020, the pandemic hit. The big rush was everything's got to close down, right? Office spaces. And what was really painful for us, we just had opened up our new office and we haven't been able to take full advantage of it because everything did have to close down and this whole work from home transition came into play. So, from Jim, Michael, the first thing that comes to mind is security around working from home, because the original thought was most of your employees are sitting in your office, you're building your infrastructure, right? You had a secure infrastructure, you controlled it, but now you've got employees going wherever. It's kind of like everyone's working from Starbucks, right? And we never thought that was a secure situation. But from the identity and the security side, what were some of the biggest challenges that we saw from the work from home wave?
Yeah, so I'll start off. One of the biggest challenges, typically we had customers set up with multi-factor, and as a bunch of users went home that had not worked from home or were not enrolled, so there was the hurdle to get them enrolled and get those accounts secure, or to deploy multi-factor to ensure that the people that were getting into your tenant were your people, right? So we didn't lose those accounts to get them enrolled. And some of them, like we had a customer down in North Carolina that they got the word on Friday that on Wednesday the following week, all 1,100 people will be working from home. So how do you get 1,100 people to enroll in MFA and get the tools installed, all that kind of stuff? So it was generally tight. The two things were getting people enrolled and securely deploying it, but tight timelines just to get it to adopt, because a lot of decisions were made pretty quickly. It impacts security, and a lot of people we disabled group creation, that kind of stuff, just to keep the usage streamlined to meetings and messaging, and then went back and revisited some of the governance settings on Teams. And that's kind of the approach that a lot of customers took.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that a little bit, and from what Bill said before about the stars aligning or getting lucky from the Microsoft perspective, we did see a lot of customers starting to look more closely at security and identity management, just because they've gotten to the point where a lot of their workloads were already onboarded into the cloud, so they were starting to look at security a little more closely rather than just, hey, we know we're only allowing things from our corporate environments and we know that's secure. Then all of a sudden that corporate environment's really not there anymore, or not playing a large part, and having to expand on that. So we were seeing a drive towards that anyways. And from our perspective, from a corporate perspective, we've been trying to hammer the importance to clients anyways. So that message was being driven home pretty quickly, and kind of with an anvil. So I think from that perspective, people were getting acclimated to it anyways. And then we also saw a large uptick in the Azure AD Premium for things like conditional access to help that along. And along with what Jim said, the multi-factor authentication was, of course, a big uptick in that as well.
Okay, great. And, kind of building upon that, as people are going home, they're used to using their desktop, right? That's sitting at their desk in the office. But I would assume, Chris and Rick, I would assume most businesses didn't issue a laptop for every customer or every employee that they had, or didn't have a secure remote methodology in place to account for the vast majority of their employees from working from their home computer, or some shared computer that might be part of their family, right? Might not even be their own personal home computer. It might be used by their kids for homework, their spouses for their work. What did we see, or what did we expect going into 2020? Because I would assume that leading into 2020, we weren't looking at a huge influx in device management, but what did you guys see leading into that? Mute, Rick.
You're on mute, buddy.
Thank you, guys. It used to be BYOD was a nice thing to have, right? Oh, that's a great initiative. Maybe next year we'll do it. But last year kicked that into overdrive for many clients. And no longer was a nice to have, it was a necessity. So in a way, it kind of pushed things forward. So that's what I see in that arena. Yeah,
I would say, a lot of customers, I think going into 2020, we're still working on, getting rid of Windows 7. They still got legacy systems and things that are floating out there. And then all of a sudden, now you've got this group of people, everyone in your workforce that has to now work from home. You've got to now address and manage what their, what you would have done in office from an upgrade perspective. You may or may not have a robust, presence to that's based in cloud or even on-prem to deliver that solution without requiring lots of touching. And so I think a lot of businesses scrambled to get not only get things enrolled and be able to be manageable from Intune, or whatever their cloud solutions were that they had, but to be able to deliver a smooth experience on their endpoint. And I don't think businesses were prepared for the sudden influx of issuing corporate laptops. If you look at, I think Gartner said that through the third quarter, notebook shipments had went up something like 26% year over year in terms of sales. And that just tells you that when it came to remote work, businesses had to really adjust. Consumers also had to really adjust. They're forcing I've got to have a quiet space to work. I've got to manage kids. How do I do that? and all of those things kind of just were just out of left field. I think businesses really had to react to it. And tools like Intune and managing mobile devices and laptops really helped with that. And we were really doing a lot of reaction from customers. Just, hey, we need to get this stood up. We need to do it last weekend. Everybody's got to be enrolled and go. I think that's in the demand. And then start adding in the features later. We need to be able to manage these devices up front, and then start adding in our features and functions that we really need later. Right now, it's mostly management, or was mostly management.
I would agree. It's let's get everyone onboarded, and then we'll do something with it later. They're really not doing much with it, but at least getting them in. So
Okay.
hopefully that's 2021's focus.
So what have you seen as far as, customers, their ongoing plan? You mentioned just get them enrolled and then take that next step of whether it's, enrolling their personal devices today and then slowly issuing out corporate devices. Is that the direction that you think a lot of companies will take, is to try to distribute mobile devices, company issued laptops across their entire workforce? Is this the end of the desktop computer?
I think the desktop will always have a place. But I see a more disparate mobile workforce even after the pandemic is over. Employees and businesses have learned that they can, with the right tools, manage and handle, a disparate workforce and keep people engaged, keep people collaborating. So I think you'll see a return to the office, but I think it'll be less than what we had pre-pandemic.
And I think there's still some learning going on. I think it's our job to show some of these things that can be done, utilize some certain policies. One of the big areas of pain are group policies. Everyone wants to get off group policy, and it's actually a pretty easy process if you go through it the right way. So hopefully we can encourage some of these upgrades.
And to piggyback off of that, I would say that device data is also a huge one, because people, if you think about it, how many people have a corporate laptop that never was connected to OneDrive or some sort of cloud service where you could manage where your data goes and who's got control of it, who's sharing it? You had to come up with all of these solutions like almost immediately on how you're going to keep your corporate data, your confidential data, your proprietary stuff, whether it's scientific formulas for some sort of colorant that you're mixing, or, some sort of fancy new tool that you're working on. All that client data is confidential. And how do you secure that? And that's where you'll start to see, I think, businesses start to focus now, in addition to securing those endpoints with identity.
But you bring up a good point on the data, right? Most of the time we're used to the data being on some Windows file server or file share somewhere on the internal network. But now that we're not all plugged into the internal network, what do? So this kind of goes to, Sean, James, and Michael. What did we see, or what did you guys see as far as solutions like remote desktop services? Or Sean, just having SharePoint, did we see just a huge influx in the consumption of SharePoint just to make data securely available in a controllable cloud environment for customers? Did we see an uptick or an increased sense of urgency to migrate data up to the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. OneDrive became not just a how do we turn it off kind of conversation, but how do we make it work? People were kind of dabbling in it. A lot of the customers that I work with have been, hadn't really been pushing it as well. We need to make this the default save location on Windows, and how do we do that without just losing control of the files? And I think people have gotten pretty comfortable with using attachments and your local documents. Save it to my C drive, drag and drop it into Outlook, and away it goes. And Outlook makes that very easy. But by putting it in OneDrive, now we can put policies on it. We can put rights management in place, ARM. We can start talking about, again, your conditional access, right? You can see the documents in a browser, but you can't download them depending on what kind of device you have, what the level of security on that device is. So and then Teams then also is an extension of that, being able to access those files in the chat in any other of those O365 applications.
One thing I think that, oh, sorry, Chris, I was going to say one thing to piggyback off of what Sean was mentioning. One of the great things about OneDrive would be version history. How many times has anyone made an accidental edit to a document that you didn't have a backup of and have to go, recreate that? And one of those, versioning is something that's just kind of, for me, using OneDrive every day is taken for granted because it's just nice to have. If I whiff on a document, I can restore to previous version, or I can grab a table out of it and just be able to be more agile and not have to worry so much about having a million copies of the same Word document.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I mean, most of us weren't used to versioning on our desktop, right? If I have a file stored on my desktop, you're absolutely right. I make a change, I lose my previous history unless I've gone in and, what was it, shadow copies, or you could do that on Windows. How many people actually did that though?
If you remember to turn it on.
yeah, and in the age of ransomware, that's really important.
Yes, that's a very good point as well. So Sean, you mentioned, the integration or brought up how do we share data within teams. And one of the things that I've seen organizations struggle with a little bit is, we're in a Teams meeting, we have participants just like this inside and outside of the organization. I click and drag a file, or I post a link to that file in Teams to the chat, and not everyone can download it. It seems like there might be a gap there on either the way Microsoft is presenting that in Teams, maybe popping up from a permission standpoint. Maybe it has to give us more visibility into what permissions are set or what sharing restrictions are in place. Or it's more of an education for end users on understanding when you can and cannot share files. Do you know of anything that Microsoft is doing to try to make that a little bit easier?
They've been working toward bridging that gap in some of the heritage way of approaching things, right? So in Skype, you could send a file, but if there were limitations to that, and of course it lived in the persistent chat. In SharePoint, you can share a document, get a link, and then post that link. But that's not always intuitive to the user of, what exactly am I sharing? What is the effect of giving people rights to these things? Do I know that everyone in this chat's going to be able to actually click that link and get a document? Some will, some won't. In my organization, out of my organization, guests. I think there's a lot of clarity that Microsoft's trying to bring to that story as well.
And I want to go back to the previous question that I had, and it was mostly around the team's usage of OneDrive, but also Michael and Jim. You would think the traditional method, if I had to work from home, that we would have some remote desktop, right? I could log into a Citrix farm or a remote app environment. Did we see any kind of increase on solutions like that? Because that would be one of the first things, or is that an outdated way of looking at how to accommodate a work from home environment?
So I saw a little bit of it. A couple of customers looked at ways to get people in from their home PC to their desktops. You had mentioned, I think Christian mentioned, there were a lot of laptops sold. Right? I know the company my brother works for, they were close to a PC refresh anyway, so their refresh for everybody was laptops. There are, they don't issue desktops anymore. So there was some of that. There was a little bit of the VDI through the Azure RDS, through Citrix if they already had it. So there was an uptick in some of those things as well. So it was kind of, it depended on the company, what they were comfortable with, they already had. If they didn't have the in-house knowledge for things like Citrix or remote desktop, it's not as steep as it used to be, but it's a little bit of a steep learning curve. Plus, getting, you talked about getting access to on-premises data. So if you're going to do it from Azure, you don't have a Citrix farm on-prem. How do you get people in? You do a VPN between them. So there were a lot of hurdles to get through for, what are we really trying to get them to? And, when you mentioned data, one of the things that popped to my mind was we had customers that didn't have enough seats for VPN to get everybody in to be able to get to on-premises data. So how do you control that? So the solution was moving things to SharePoint, moving things to, out to where the cloud where they could get to it, and then allowing kind of the BYO on the device side as appropriate. So there were a combination. Unfortunately, it depended on what was already in place and where their comfort level was with certain things.
Okay. So I want to get on to planning ahead and looking at 2021, but I'm going to put Bill on the hot seat a little bit here and ask a question that I'm not sure you might not even have the info on, but I'll ask it anyways. When you look at businesses from a financial perspective going into 2020, obviously work from home, any kind of investment that businesses had to make to acquire new hardware, laptops, probably unexpected expenses. But when you look at businesses in general, or what we've seen across our customers, was this a year of immense loss financially because of that rapid change, that rapid accommodation to keep the lights on, so to speak, even though they're not in their offices anymore? Or do you see cloud as kind of being a savior, so to speak, because it was a relatively cost-effective way to add business continuity to a lot of organizations?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of creative things that happened in the year. I do think I think it depends on the organization. There are a whole bunch of other factors. I think you come into your question on did the pandemic and the associated IT costs to support the pandemic, did it cause a problem for the businesses? I think that's there's multiple factors there that come into play. I think those IT firms or IT organizations that had planned and were already starting down this path, I think they were in a much better spot. I do know that many of our customers are cost constrained. They had budget problems in 2020, and that hurt them now for 2021, having to invest in areas that they weren't expecting to invest, really to keep the lights on. I think you'll see some of that start to change. I know a lot of our customers are renegotiating leases for office space. Many have made the comment that the IT teams will not be back in the office or not nearly at the level that they were at before, but those are things that take time. Those type of shifts aren't something that save them money. Yeah, you could say they save money on electricity and they save money on some other things in the office, but the big outlay of money was still occurring. I think now as we see those changes come into play, I think you'll see some of those changes start to happen, and hopefully that frees up some budgets, makes it a little bit easier. But I do think that those the organizations that were strategic and had been planning ahead, I think were better prepared for what happened last year, and thus the financial impact may have been a little bit easier, softer, if there's such a thing, than it would have been for those who were, of the mindset that no, everybody has a desktop and you work in the office and we're not going to have remote connectivity. So,
well, what do you think moving into 2021? What should businesses be doing different? What should they be planning differently? Kind of learning from what we saw in 2020. Obviously, we're already in the work from home, right?
Yep.
So that impact has hit us. But as we hopefully get through this pandemic and we're able to start being in the offices more, what should businesses be doing to prepare for that? How should they be budgeting differently, or where should they be looking at focusing their investments moving forward? I mean, there was probably a high unexpected investment in cloud to begin with in 2020. Is that something that we should still plan for in 2021, or what do you think?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think what you're going to see, and I think Microsoft's kind of betting on this a little bit too, is the way the office is used is different. Rather than being the office where you go to do work, I think what you're going to see is they're going to turn into collaboration hubs. You go into the office to collaborate with the other people. And I think you're still going to have the situation where some people have to be remote and can't be there. So those technologies that give you meeting rooms, for example, where I actually have the capability of the people in the office have a very good experience, a typical experience, and also are able to work extremely well with those people who aren't there. I think you're going to see a lot of investment from Microsoft in that area, and I think that's going to be one of the big changes that are going to happen this year is as people are going back into the work, into the office buildings for collaboration, how do they collaborate with those people who still have to be remote? So there's a huge investment there. And I think I'd be curious, at the end, we can actually open up the lines a little bit and see what our customers are seeing. If they're seeing that trend as well, investing in meeting rooms that are Teams enabled essentially, or other technologies that do the similar type of thing. It doesn't have to be the Microsoft technology, but that would be a sign that that trend is here to stay and going to start to impact us.
Good. And as I said, I do want to get into what should we be planning on in 2021, and obviously Teams is a big piece of that, right? So we've seen a lot of innovation, a lot of changes come into Teams over the last year. But I'll go to you, Sean, on what do you see? What do you think we learned in 2020 that should guide us in 2021 when it comes to our use of Teams? What should we expect out of Teams? But then also, what do you see on Microsoft's roadmap? What do they have planned for Teams? How are they going to make it better and align better to how we work today?
Yeah, I think I'll answer your second question first. A lot of what Microsoft has been sort of hinting at is expansion of that app ecosystem or extensions of Teams, being able to add things like intranet buttons and things like that have recently been rolled out. And how did you phrase the first part of your question again, Chris?
Yeah, it's really, what do we learn from 2020 going into 2021 for Teams adoption, right? Because we've seen that huge influx in Teams meetings. Obviously we want to stay on top of what Microsoft is looking to prepare and roll out for us. But, do we see anything different with Teams? And, right now we're in a web conference. What are our expectations moving forward? The breakout rooms is a great example of something that came in 2020.
Yeah.
What else is missing that we should have or we should be expecting from Microsoft? Obviously they have the user voice site that we can all submit requests and vote up to try to make that more of a priority for Microsoft. And they tell us that they do review that and take it seriously. But what do we see on the collaboration side? I mean, not just Teams, but your extension of Teams in SharePoint. What should we be expecting in 2021 when it comes to Teams?
That's a good question. They've posted a few things, but I think that they've made so much progress today that it's become a really well built tool. Maybe Bill would have some specific items he'd want to expand on that, but they picked up a lot of where those gaps that we saw early on. They closed those gaps very quickly.
Yeah, the breakout rooms, some of those things are there now. You're seeing, if you just do a quick search out on the Microsoft site and look at what they have coming, I think Teams of things that are being released soon, not released yet, released soon. I think they have 143 features coming out in the next 1 to 6 months, which is impressive. There's quite a few things there. And I think that it is the one thing we all have to keep an eye on is the security side of things. People are continuing to work remote. There are exploits out there. SolarWinds keeps us reminded of some of these engineering, phishing attacks and exploits that can be engineered to cause havoc. People are using new technology, and it opens up the ability for hackers and nefarious individuals to take advantage of it. So you do see Microsoft. If you go look through those features, you see quite a bit around security of identity, security of data, how to secure that data with AIP, and making AIP actually work easy. You see a lot of things that Microsoft's focused on there, which I think is important because that is going to be a massive change I think that we're going to see this year, that we're going to have to be very much on our toes to keep the environment secure and not open us up to other risks just because we had to open it up to get people in from the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we think about security, that is, I think the 2019 or even the 2020 security report or cyber attack report from Microsoft highlighted how many threats came out because they were taking advantage of COVID-19. They were phishing attacks that were trying to trick people under the disguise of being informative about the pandemic or COVID-19, being in a disguise of changes like from HR. Oh, here's our new policy on, sick leave and stuff like that. Click here to read the new policy manual, things like that. They really took advantage of that. So when we think about security, Microsoft's been touting this identity as the new security plane for a while. But Michael and Jim, what do you guys see going into 2021? Obviously, identity is a big part of security. But where's Microsoft going? What should we expect to see out of them in the next year? And where do we want them to go in the next year?
So interesting. So the one thought I have on, like, the one thing I hear a lot from customers, and I hear from in our conversations with our partner manager and stuff, is that there are requests for the ability to control the features of Teams coming out, because it ends up, while it's great, there are certain things like breakout rooms which are fantastic, and they're pretty low impact because it doesn't really change anything unless you go to use them. But to actually slow that down or have the administrators be able to control when features hit their tenant. So that was one of the things, like, as an IT team, you've got to stay on top of it. It's more continuous education because Teams does change so rapidly. The client is on a 2-week release schedule. I mean, that's the crazy part about it. The Teams client is self-updating. You'll get a, hey, every now and then you'll see a little box that says, hey, you've got the latest version. So that's part of it, is just keeping pace with that. The kind of the second side where I see things going. So Chris, you and I've been doing O365 and BPOS for a long time. The mantra was any device, anywhere, anytime, right? Access to your data, get to it from wherever you happen to be, at a kiosk, from the airport, from grandma's house. Well, that now has become, the hackers can get to your data from any device, anytime, anywhere. So you saw a lot of mobile device, mobile management things come into play, where Microsoft slipped in basic device management as a part of the service, and then really spent some time on Intune. And that's really where I see a lot of change on the Microsoft side. So earlier or towards the end of last year, there was the announcement of kind of pulling everything under the umbrella of Defender. So security at the endpoint, the concept of bring your own device for a Windows device, and in essence, carving off a portion of your user's device to control where your data sits. So kind of that work profile on a endpoint. So a lot of those things are securing the endpoint security. So we talked a little bit about conditional access in one of the talks I gave on identity-driven security, right? The zero trust. So they've really expanded on zero trust and given people, with some of the new features for endpoint management, a lot of control, and that's going to be a big item for this year as they kind of come up with that. Do we want to have what are we going to do on the endpoint? How do we get all of these things in? And then how do we monitor and track and manage it?
Yeah, so you brought up endpoint management, and it was the anywhere access, any device, any location, and the one example was always, you can use the hotel kiosk, the airport kiosk, and nowadays we cringe when we hear someone saying, hey, we need to be able to use an airport kiosk. But Chris and Rick, from an endpoint perspective, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I've seen just employees or users being more demanding on what they can use, because we're all working from home. A lot of us are using personally owned devices, but that's not just our desktops, right? There's apps and data now being stored all over these mobile devices. So looking ahead at 2021, we did see a huge increase for mobile device management. But what do you think is going to be different in 2021 that differs from where we were in 2020, right? Where's Microsoft heading with their endpoint management?
So, especially from mobile device management, it's still a pretty cumbersome process, especially going off one platform into another. They're working to make it easier to ingest mobile devices and to manage them. Currently, there's policies that you can manage them, but they're pretty tricky, and a lot of them overwrite the other policies. So I think they're going to make it simpler and easier to manage mobile devices this year, hopefully.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see more of a merge of feature and functionality from on-based Microsoft Endpoint Manager, formerly SCCM on-prem or whatever you want to call it, and then Intune, which is now also MEM in cloud. I think you're going to start to see a lot of those features kind of merge together. They're never going to get rid of their on-prem solutions, because there's those systems are there for for obvious reasons. But I think you're going to start to see features and functionality that exist in on-prem SCCM start to make its way into Intune and vice versa to allow you to have more, a more robust management of your endpoints. You're going to see, I think you're going to see more focus on things like conditional access and role-based administration. I think you're going to see more focus on compliance policies and enrollment restrictions, which speaks to the security focus that every business is really queued up on. I think when you hear cloud, everyone's like, oh, security. That's the first thing that kind of happens. And I think that as that becomes simpler to manage, but give you more robust features as they move into this year and move into 2021, I think that'll be a good thing.
Great. So we are getting close to the hour here. I do want to, I'll have one more question. I want to go around the horn. So I'll give you guys a heads up so you can think about it here while I do a little housekeeping. But I want to get your perspectives, each one of you, on if you had to give one piece of advice to all of our CSP customers, what's one thing that they should be planning on, looking at doing, or changing in the upcoming year? All right, so think about that, but let me real quick, I do want to just kind of recap here before we come to the conclusion of our first session. Reviewing our upcoming series, it is going to be focused on endpoint management. So a lot of what Chris and Rick have been talking about will definitely be the primary focus of the remainder of our sessions. But that doesn't mean that that's all we can focus on. So I do want to encourage everyone to provide feedback, submit requests. We want to put additional information out there. So if you want to see something specific, if there's a certain topic you want to learn more on, let us know. I have no problem putting together another webinar session that's outside of our series, a one-off if necessary, that covers those topics that you do want to hear. So I do want to encourage those of you that are on the phone to come off mute if you have any questions, anything that you want to ask specifically of our team. Now's the time to do it. If not, I'll go around the horn and kind of go through that last question I kind of posed to the whole team or the panel here. So real quick, anybody on the phone want to come off and ask any specific questions that you guys might have at this time? All right. Well, let's start with you, Mr. Bat, since you're in the top left of my screen. Question is, I'll reiterate it, what, if you could give one piece of advice to our customers on what they should be looking at to do in 2021, either something different, something they should be considering doing, what would that piece of advice be?
I don't know if it's so much different, but we've seen the shift from just pretty much a strict office environment to pretty much a strict work from home environment. So I would say just get prepared for that more hybrid approach. I mean, now that work from home, Pandora's box has been opened, if you will. That's not going to go away from a management perspective. I think that a lot of people were leery about looking at that, but now that it's been implemented and they see it working well, it's certainly not going to go away. So the big thing will be how to make that very transparent. So especially from a security standpoint, how do we make it just as easy and accessible from the office as it is remote, and how do we carry that going forward? So that is certainly an area I would focus on.
Great. How about you, Bill?
Get to my mute. I do think it's as you start to leverage these platforms, how do you really start to make them work for your employees? So things like team apps and the bots that are in there, how do you actually pull those in, take advantage of them, and get a little bit more out of the platform than what you may have been expecting to get out of it just out of the box? Okay.
Sean?
I would say connect with your early adopters, keep them in the loop, get feedback from them. They're going to be your biggest champions when it comes to rolling out new capabilities in the cloud, and also finding out the pain points and the things that you need to address.
Great. Yeah, great point there. What about you, Rick?
Well, what I'd like to say is actually just to reinforce what you were saying. The guys on the phone or on this call, let us know some specific things that you really need help with. I know MBAM is a big one now because you have to migrate off of MBAM. What would really help is specific things you need help with, so we can work on that in the presentation. So that's what I would say. Just think of things you really need help with, and we'll be there.
Great. Chris.
So I would say that as we move into 2021 and people are going to continue to want to be remote. So keep in mind that people may want or have the need to just want to use their own equipment. Some people just like to work the way they work. And if you do a lot of hiring out of college, new talent coming into the workforce, they're very focused on and interested in companies that allow them that flexibility to be able to work from home or in the office. And so if you have a good, robust, or beginning to flush out a robust process or policy or whatever you want to call it for remote work, those things will help you attract talent, and it will make your life a lot easier if you start planning for that now. It will certainly help you out. That would be it for me.
All right, great. And bring us home, Jim.
All right, last but not least. So I'll reinforce one of the things that Bill said that I think is going to be critically important. So we have a lot of customers, a lot of time, energy, and effort was spent to basically support a very abrupt work from home strategy, right? So what I would encourage people to do this year is to leverage that work that you've put in to expand on it, make it smoother. Chris said, make it a little more transparent. It's not going to go away. It may pull back some. I fully anticipate that, but be able to leverage those and support some of the things that you can do remotely. Like look at integration with like phone system to be able to have a kind of a seamless way to talk with people, but leverage the platforms and the things you've got into place. Look at other ways you can use it to reconnect. So one of the things that it's the people side of work from home, the water cooler hallway conversations have gone away. How can you leverage those tools to reconnect your workforce to keep them entertained? That's one of the big things I think. I would tell people leverage the investment. Look what else you can do with it to be able to leverage it. And then the other half is monitor. So kind of being security being near and dear to my heart. Make sure you're tracking who's doing what, that you can go back and look at those kind of things. Make sure your environment's secure. The attack sophistication is just going through the roof. I mean, we get it, in our tenant all the time, and I see it, on a broad spectrum, and it's kind of crazy. So, keep pace with security, but also leverage the tools to continue to improve your work from home experience.
All right, great. Well, Mike, Bill, Rick, Chris, Sean, Jim, appreciate your insights and your participation in this panel. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So again, we appreciate everyone for joining in on the session. We hope to see you in the upcoming session in February, where we'll start diving into our device management series. We'll stick around for a couple more minutes if anybody does want to come off mute, but I appreciate everyone for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.